Hey, what's up, everybody? We are back after a much-needed break. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and we're here with some more UFC DFS picks and lineup advice for both FanDuel and DraftKings for Holloway versus KATTAR. In this video, we'll talk about this main event, talk about some of our favorite plays for FanDuel and DraftKings, specific lineup strategies for low-risk and high-risk contests, and then specifically our favorite FanDuel MVPs. Before we get started, go ahead and click that subscribe button below to get access to all of our videos as soon as they're released here on YouTube. Give us a thumbs up. If you like this video, we appreciate that. Any questions you have, you can always hop in our Discord channel, or you can just comment below in this video, and we'll get back to you before the slate locks at like noon Eastern. Random start time for the slate. Now, you know me, I'm Brian, but you may not know. If you've been in our Discord channel, you definitely know him. But I'm joined today by a special guest, Jake McIntyre, aka Jake the Snake, aka Occupy member, who has started his own MMA DFS site, MMADFS.com. Jake, what's up, man?
Not a whole lot, man. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So you can find Jake's work, again, MMADFS.com or on Twitter at DFS_MMA. So, Jake, I want to ask you this Holloway versus KATTAR fight, your first thoughts on it and your perspective on how much of either of these guys we need in our DFS lineups.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a hard fight to fail. So I think you could go 100%. I think you probably want to be at least 90%. But I mean, really, you probably want to start all your lineups with one of these two guys.
And we've had some slates in the past, right, where we're like, we definitely need this main event. Maybe you don't need this main event. We've had different ends of the spectrum, but this is one of those fights. I agree. It looks like you want to have one of these guys in all of your lineups, especially if you're just making a handful of lineups. Do you lean either way, Holloway or KATTAR, for high risk contests?
You know, I'm on Holloway. I mean, I think you probably want to have a little bit of KATTAR, but I think Holloway is the play here.
Cool, for sure. Totally agree with that. And let's talk about some UFC debuts, because we love looking at fighters fighting for the first time in the octagon, at least in the UFC, because we don't have any official stats on them. And as a result, the betting markets are kind of soft, and their ownership can get moved one way or the other, just depending on the betting markets. And there's a lot of hidden upside in these fighters. Jake, there's a lot of fighters on this particular slate that are making their second UFC fight, but Edwards is making her debut. I want to get your thoughts on her and maybe some of these other fighters who are just fighting for the second or third time, and what we can come to expect from them from a DFS perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So I think Edwards is okay. I think she's gotten a lot of line movement, but I think she also has a lot of red flags. I mean, she's only fought once, I think, in the last over 2 years, 26 months. She's coming off a loss to Sarah Alper, who got absolutely destroyed in her UFC debut, to Jessica Rose Clark, who I think she had gone to 11 straight decisions before that. So there's no reason to think she's good. So there's just this, I mean, it's kind of a dangerous rationale to go down that path, but I think there's a lot of reasons to think Edwards could fail, but the line movement suggests that she's probably a good value play. At least you want to jam her into cash lineups. And, high risk, if she does win, which she has power, I mean, she can win. And if she does at her price, you're probably going to need her. So it's a tough call.
It's the ultimate high risk, high reward fade, right? So when you see
Yeah.
a line movement like this for a fighter who starts the week as an underdog, flips to a favorite, generally they have some of the highest ownership we'll see on the slate. And Jake, she's like $11 on FanDuel, right?
Yeah, she's super cheap. So I mean, if she even wins, let alone gets a finish, she's probably going to be in the optimal lineup on FanDuel, especially, and probably on DraftKings. But I don't know. I mean, for some reason, I have a bad feeling about her. I don't know what it is.
But I guess her competition hasn't been that great, right? It's not like we saw her fight, some of the best fighters that her division has to offer before the UFC, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, if you go on YouTube, the top result is her assaulting someone that didn't look like they were a professional fighter at all, and I'm assuming everyone saw that, and that's why they're driving this line. It was like a 28-second KO. I think she had a 5-inch height advantage. She was going against someone who had won. I think her three opponents had one combined win in her 3 wins. I mean, it was kind of a joke of a fight. So if you go back to her last real fight, it's 26 months ago. I mean, it was her only LFA fight, and she lost a 5-round decision. So that's really the one that I'm focusing on, opposed to her KO in her last match.
Yeah, and you talk about the line moves. So let's talk about some of the biggest line moves on the slate. And as we see here, we're in our Occupy model now, occupyfantasy.com, that ranks every fighter for FanDuel and DraftKings by our proprietary metric, the OF index. And we could take a look at the line moves. And generally, in most sports, this will tell us who some of the sharp bettors are on. But Jake, in MMA, we find that some of these line moves are, I don't want to say erroneous, but they're definitely head scratching, and not to be not to look at them after the fact, but a lot of them, the fight will happen, and it was like, there's no way that line move should have occurred. So I want to get your thoughts on some of the big line moves for this particular slate. So we got Ponzi, the number one line move, 40-cent move in his favor. He's up to minus 305 on the money line. Imavov, 32-cent favorite. He's all the way down to plus 108 as the underdog versus Halls. And then Edwards, who we just talked about, a 30-cent move. I think we know how you feel about that one. But those first two fighters, what are your thoughts on their line moves and what that means for DFS?
I think the Ponzi line move could be fraudulent, to be honest. I like the Condit move. I'm on that. And the Imavov, he seems to get the line moving every time he's in a fight. The line moves in his favor. I mean, he did win his first fight, but I'm kind of indifferent on that one.
Cool. Yeah. And again, a decent amount of moves on this slate, 6 or 7 of 10 cents or more. And we'll probably see some more on Saturday morning. We are recording this Friday afternoon. So be sure to check back at the model to see which fighters have seen bets pour in their favor before the fight actually starts. All right, Jake, I want to get your opinion on some top plays. Let's go back. So Jake, again, he writes up the sheet on MMADFS.com and breaks down every single fight, betting, and DFS implications. And we've partnered with Jake to bring some of his analysis to OccupyFantasy.com in the form of our famous daily plug. So go check that out. And Jake, in the daily plug, you do list, 4 or 5 of your top plays. I want to hear you talk about a couple fighters that you think people should definitely have in their DFS lineups for Saturday's slate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing, people can look at this and realize that there's kind of 4 expensive, obvious plays. You look at, there's Hawes, there's Todorovic, there's Buckley, and there's Holloway. And obviously you can't play all of them, and you probably wouldn't want to, but I really like Todorovic personally. I mean, I think you're probably going to end up playing Holloway too, but if you're going to end up fading people, well, I mean, we can talk about that after. But in terms of the top plays, definitely Todorovic. And I think a sneaky one is going to be Lingo, who he's coming off. He just got absolutely destroyed in his debut by Zalal. Sorry. But he's going against Kilburn, who he made Billy Quarantino famous. So I think that's the type of guy we're looking to target is Kilburn here. So Lingo looks like a sneaky expensive play if you get off Buckley and Ponzi and potentially Hawes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, UFC DFS sometimes is about the fighter themselves. I would say oftentimes about their opponent, right? We're looking to target fighters who are get finished often, get controlled on the ground pretty frequently. And a lot of times in your write-ups, I know we'll see that we'll say this is a fight of 2 fighters that we want to target against, but they're fighting each other. So we have no idea how it's going to turn out. So so Lingo's definitely a guy we want to target just because of his opponent specifically.
For sure.
Speaking of bad fighters, any fighters you're thinking that we should fade, whether it's because they're terrible or we don't think their ownership accurately reflects their upside?
Yeah, so I started to touch on it. I got a little ahead of myself, but I think Ponzi is going to be over-owned. He's coming off a 2-year layoff. He had a really bad staph infection in his knee. At one point, I think he thought he might never fight again. I think 3 of his last 5 fights have ended in decisions, and he's the second most expensive fighter on the DraftKings slate and the most expensive on FanDuel. He seems like an easy fade, and he's going against a guy who's never been knocked out. So...
And that's interesting because you look at his projected ownership again. So Jake provides our DraftKings projected ownership in the Occupy model. We provide the FanDuel projected ownership. And if you see here, we have Ponzi 39% projected on DraftKings, the 5th highest owned fighter. FanDuel, the top 4 or 5 highest owned flex. So I like your call there for a potential fade. Speaking of FanDuel, Jake, we'll close out the show here. You've been famous. You won the FanDuel Big GPP once already. I won it earlier in the year, and we both have had success with playing, I would say, non-traditional MVPs, underdogs, lower tier fighters. Tell us why that's the case and who you think could fit the bill for this particular slate.
Definitely. I mean, so the majority of the field, they just go after the guys with the high round 1 KO chances. And I mean, that's easy. That's the low hanging fruit. But really you want to get these 1 to 2, maybe 3% owned MVP plays at your on FanDuel. And I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, we're not going for 5 out of 6 wins. So if you're gonna play someone, it doesn't matter if they're gonna lose because you're just playing for the upside. So if it's whether it's an underdog or a favorite, if you get a guy that has good upside, you might as well put him in the MVP spot, especially if you know he's only going to be 1 or 2% owned. So a couple guys that we're looking at this week would be Zawada.
If there's one thing about UFC DFS, it's the names are nearly impossible to pronounce.
So hard. Yeah, brutal. So I'm going to have to come up with nicknames for some of these guys. But I think Zawada and a guy like Matt Brown, I don't think Matt Brown's going to win. But if he does win, it's probably going to be a KO, and he's probably going to score well. And he might be popular in the flex spot, but most people are not going to put him in the MVP spot because they're just not wired to think that way.
Absolutely. You're 100% right. When I could put in one of the biggest favorites and one of the biggest power punchers on the card in my MVP slot, why would I pick an underdog to do so? But again, the line of thinking is if that underdog is in the optimal lineup, that means they won. And there are some underdogs, if they win, they're going to score very highly. So it's a completely different line of thinking and something you have to keep in mind when building your MMA DFS lineups, whether it's the regular traditional FanDuel slate or the late slate on DraftKings with the captain spot. So that'll do it for this video. Hope you learned something from it. You can get more information from a variety of sources from us, so check it out. We got OccupyFantasy.com. Check out the daily plug that Jake wrote, and with his top plays and lineup strategies for this specific slate. Check out the Occupy model, ranks every single fighter, FanDuel, and DraftKings. And then check out MMADFS.com, Jake's site. The sheet, it writes up every single fighter, breaks down the fights, talks about DFS and betting implications. So you can follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. Go follow him because he will be tweeting updates leading up to lock if there are any changes. Fingers crossed that there are no fight cancellations. You can follow us on Twitter at Occupy Fantasy. And again, before we get out here, subscribe, get notified to the latest videos, give us a thumbs up. Any questions, you can ask me or Jake in our Discord channel or by commenting on this YouTube video below. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening. Good luck, and we'll talk to you soon.